Most people, when they think about someone stealing from them, picture a stranger, someone they have never met, faceless, operating from a distance, a hacker in another country, a thief who breaks a car window, someone outside the circle. Nobody pictures their best friend of 11 years sitting at a kitchen table using information they memorized over a decade of closeness, methodically taking apart a life they helped build. I did not picture it either. That was the problem. My name is not something I will share, but I will tell you who I was at the time this started. 36. Divorced for 2 years, not bitterly, just the kind of divorce that happens when two people grow into different shapes and finally admit it. I had a daughter who was 9, shared custody that worked reasonably well, and a small but stable financial life that I had rebuilt carefully after the marriage ended. A savings account that meant something, good credit, a retirement fund I had started later than I should have, but was serious about now. Nothing flashy, just the financial foundation of a person who had learned from their mistakes and was finally standing on solid ground. And then there was Danny. Danny and I had been friends since our mid-20s. We met at a work conference, of all places, the kind of mandatory corporate event everyone dreads, 2-day thing at a hotel outside the city where nobody wants to be. We got stuck at the same table for a dinner on the first night and discovered within about 20 minutes that we had the same sense of humor about the same things, which is rarer than it sounds and more binding than most people realize. After that conference, we stayed in touch through job changes and moves and relationships and all the things that filter out the friendships that were never really friendships. Danny made it through all of it. He knew things about me that required years to learn. My financial situation, not in exact detail, but well enough. He knew I had rebuilt after the divorce. He knew I had worked hard at my credit score. He had been at my apartment when I refinanced my car, when I opened a new savings account, when I did my taxes one February evening with a beer and too many browser tabs open. He knew the answers to the kind of security questions that are supposed to be private but somehow always come up naturally between people who have been close for a long time. Your mother's maiden name, the street you grew up on, the name of your first pet. He knew all of it because I told him, over years, the way you tell someone who matters to you the ordinary details of your life without thinking twice. I need to tell you something about the months before I found out, because the context matters more than people usually give it credit for. Danny had been going through something. That was the word he used, something. He had lost a job in the spring, a good one, the kind that takes time to replace at the level he was used to. He had a girlfriend who had moved out not long after the job. He was renting a room from someone to keep his expenses down, which he described with the kind of forced lightness people use when they're embarrassed about their circumstances. I helped where I could, picked up more checks when we went out, offered to lend him money twice, which he declined both times. I told myself he was just proud, that he was getting back on his feet, that this was a rough patch, not a character reveal. I believed that completely. I want to be clear about that. I was not naive or careless. I believed it because I knew him, or thought I did. The first sign that something was wrong had nothing to do with Danny at all. It was a credit card statement. I had a credit card I rarely used, one I kept for emergencies and the occasional larger purchase. I checked it once a month out of habit, a routine I had built after the divorce when I became more careful about where my money was. On a Tuesday evening in October, I opened the statement and saw 4 charges I did not recognize. Not enormous individually, a furniture retailer, an electronics subscription, a clothing site, a third-party payment service I had never used. None of them were dramatic enough to feel like fraud at first glance. They were the kind of charges you double-check before you call anyone. I double-checked them. None of them were mine. I called the card company, filed a dispute. They handled it efficiently, canceled the card, sent a new one. The representative on the phone said it was probably a data breach somewhere, she said. Happens all the time. We see it constantly. I took her word for it. I was inconvenienced, not alarmed. I moved on. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from a bank I did not have an account with. It was a statement for an account in my name that had been opened 2 months earlier, with a balance of 0 and a credit line of $8,000. That is when the inconvenience became something else entirely. I called the bank. They confirmed the account existed and that someone had opened it with my social security number, my date of birth, my address, and a copy of my driver's license. The person opening it answered all verification questions correctly. All of them. The process went through without a flag because every piece of information provided was accurate. I filed a fraud report with the bank. I called my credit monitoring service. I requested full credit reports from all 3 bureaus, and what I found, pulling it all together over 2 very unpleasant evenings at my kitchen table, was that this had been going on for almost 6 months. There were 3 accounts open in my name that I had never created, 2 credit cards, 1 personal loan with a balance that had been partially drawn down and then gone delinquent. My credit score, which I had spent 2 years building carefully, had significantly dropped. And somewhere in the middle of all this activity, a change of address request had been submitted on one of the accounts, which explained why I had not received certain statements, why nothing had shown up in my mailbox that might have tipped me off earlier. I was sitting at that table at almost midnight with a credit report spread across the screen and a cold cup of tea, and I kept asking myself the same question: how? If this hit you somewhere real, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone use your trust as a weapon? I read every one. Not who, yet. That came later. But how? Because the security questions, the answers, the document details, that wasn't a data breach. That level of accuracy across multiple accounts and multiple institutions was not someone guessing from a leaked database. Someone knew me. Someone had taken time to gather specific personal information that required access to my life. Not my computer, not my passwords, my life. I started making a mental list. It was uncomfortable, and I did not want to make it, but I made it. People who knew enough. People who had been in my apartment, who had seen documents, who had heard conversations over the years. People who knew the name of my first dog and the street I grew up on and my mother's last name before she married. The list was not long. Danny's name was on it, near the top. I did not want it to be. I cycled through the other names first, looking for reasons why it made sense to be someone else, a former coworker, an ex, a neighbor I hadn't thought about in years. Each one felt like a reach. The explanation kept landing back in the same place. Here is what I decided to do, and I want to explain the thinking behind it because it matters. I did not call him. I did not ask him. I did not send a message that said, "I know what you did," or gave any indication that I was looking in his direction. Partly because I wasn't certain, but mostly because I understood, even through the anger, and there was real anger, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, that certainty was more valuable than confrontation. If I was right, I needed more than suspicion. I needed something that would hold. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. On her advice, I filed formal identity theft reports with the FTC and with local law enforcement. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, and I began the process of disputing every fraudulent account, with documentation, in writing, through certified mail. And I hired a private investigator, not for surveillance, but for something more specific. I wanted a professional to help me trace the origin points of the accounts, the device used, the IP addresses associated with the applications, the timeline. That process took several weeks. During those weeks, I saw Danny twice, dinner once, a brief coffee another time. I behaved exactly as I always had. I asked about his job search. He said things were looking up. He seemed relaxed. more relaxed, honestly, than he had been in months. The investigator's report came on a Thursday afternoon in an email I opened in my car in a parking garage because I couldn't wait until I got home. The device used to open two of the fraudulent accounts had a registered location history that placed it consistently in Danny's neighborhood. One of the applications was submitted from an IP address tied to the coffee shop 2 blocks from where he was renting. The timeline of the account openings corresponded with periods when Danny had been, by his own account to me, under the most financial pressure. It wasn't a courtroom standard of proof, but it was enough. I went back to the lawyer. She walked me through the next steps. The documentation I had built, the fraud reports, the investigator's findings, the timeline of my financial situation before and after was solid. Law enforcement had enough to pursue it seriously, which they did. Danny was contacted by investigators about 5 weeks later. I do not have a detailed account of that conversation. What I know is that it led to a longer process, that charges were filed, and that at some point during that process he provided a confession that confirmed what the evidence had already suggested. I was not in the room for any of it. I chose not to be. There was nothing I needed to hear him say. The financial recovery was long, longer than I wanted it to be. Credit repair is not a switch you flip. It is months of letters and calls and disputes and follow-ups and patience that feels endless when you are also trying to live your life at the same time. But it moved forward. Every month, incrementally, things got better. The fraudulent accounts were removed, the delinquency was corrected, the score climbed back. It is in a better place now than it was before any of this started. That is a strange thing to say, but it is true. Going through the process of disputing everything, freezing everything, reviewing everything, made me more precise about my finances than I had ever been. What did not recover as cleanly was something harder to quantify. 11 years of friendship is not a number on a credit report. You cannot file a dispute for it. There is no process that corrects it or restores it or gives you back the version of the past where the person was who you thought they were. That is a different kind of loss, not louder than the financial one necessarily, just longer. I think about the conference sometimes, the hotel outside the city, the dinner table where we ended up sitting next to each other because of alphabetical seating or some coordinator's spreadsheet, the 20 minutes that turned into 11 years. I do not think about it with bitterness. I think about it with something closer to bewilderment, that a person can be real for so long and then not be. That closeness, real closeness, can become the exact thing that is used against you. But here's what I also know. It ended. Not the way I would have chosen, not on a timeline I would have picked, and not without damage I had to work through carefully, but it ended, with the truth intact, with the record corrected, with consequences that followed the evidence rather than being avoided by someone who had counted on my silence, my confusion, or my misplaced loyalty. He counted on me not looking too carefully. He counted on the friendship being a shield. It wasn't. Because the same thing that made me trust him for 11 years, the habit of paying attention to the people I cared about, was the same thing that told me something was wrong the moment the facts stopped making sense. I paid attention when it mattered, and eventually, that was the whole difference.